Ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court just overturned lower courts blocking Texas's redistricting efforts. This is huge, but Republicans can draw 19 more House seats, according to Politico, after the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will almost certainly repeal Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. The question, which is why the Supreme Court will overturn Section 2, is why would anyone assume that Democrats or that any demographic group within the United States of America will automatically vote Democrat? Why would anyone assume that President Trump almost won the Hispanic and Latino vote in the United States of America in 2024? Hit subscribe. Go to H.A. Goodman's other channel. Subscribe there as well. To my super chat, thank you. This is huge. Alito pauses lower court ruling that would have blocked Texas redistricting. Governor Abbott won this round. I think he'll win the battle completely. Check this out. Hit subscribe.
Well, first, that breaking news. The U.S. Supreme Court has reinstated the newly redrawn Texas congressional map. Tonight, the High Court temporarily blocked a lower court ruling that found the state's new map likely discriminates on the basis of race. Now, this is short term, but it does mean the new GOP-friendly map will remain in place as the candidate filing period continues in Texas. The order by Justice Samuel Alito calls for the map's challengers to respond in writing by Monday. The court is then expected to issue a ruling afterwards that will determine if the new map can be used for the 2026 midterm elections.
So the Supreme Court will also almost certainly rule in Governor Abbott's favor. Here is why. The Supreme Court routinely votes to overturn lower court rulings against Trump, primarily against President Trump, whether it's nationwide injunctions. That was a huge victory for President Trump, but 93% of the time, the Supreme Court overturns lower court rulings. 88% of the time, federal courts decide against President Trump. And they almost always have, 93% of the time, according to the Brennan Center, almost always, the lower courts are on the wrong side of the Constitution. We know that because the Supreme Court says wrong, unconstitutional. Anyway, check this out, ladies and gentlemen. This is Governor Abbott explaining, actually foreshadowing what happened a couple of hours ago.
It's the redistricting battle raging on. One member of a 3-judge panel issued a scathing dissent after his colleagues voted to block the redrawn congressional maps out in Texas. It reads in part, quote, "In my 37 years on the federal bench, this is the most outrageous conduct by a judge that I have ever encountered. Judge Brown's injunction turns the Texas electoral and political landscape upside down. It creates mayhem, chaos, misinformation, and confusion." So let's bring in Texas's Governor Greg Abbott. Sir, thank you for taking time with us today. Here is what that judge was dissenting from. This is the majority ruling. The 2 judges here wrote, "To be sure, politics played a role in drawing the 2025 map, but it was much more than just politics. Substantial evidence shows that Texas racially gerrymandered the 2025 map." What do you say, sir?
Well, first of all, with regard to that statement, there was actually zero evidence of any racial judgment playing any role in the decision-making process. But Jillian, know this also, that Judge Brown, who wrote that opinion, he was just reversed last year in a different redistricting decision. He was wrong last year. He's wrong this year. The senior judge you were pointing out, Jerry Smith, he was the only person on that panel from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. He was exactly right. He's never seen, and I have never seen a judgment, an opinion so erroneous in its writing. And it looked like Judge Brown geared his writing to try to achieve a result. And that's something that the United States Supreme Court, I think, is just not going to tolerate.
Okay, so it's going to maybe move up the chain in the judiciary, it sounds like. Take a look at this, sir. I want to get your response. We know that you have now designated 2 organizations, CARE and the CAR and the Muslim Brotherhood, as foreign terrorist organizations. You were out front of the president on this, sir. He has expressed interest, or Secretary Rubio has expressed interest in doing this, but as far as we know,
Time in the Texas redistricting fight, as a federal court blocks the state's newly redrawn congressional map for now.
And the federal court was overruled by the Supreme Court. Okay, there's a reason that federal judges are consistently overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, because the federal judges oftentimes have politics. They're trying to stop President Trump because Democrats in Congress can't do so. They lost miserably every swing state, the popular vote, so President Trump can't be stopped. And what he does almost always is on the right side of history and is constitutional. Democrats have consistently tried to engage in unconstitutional behavior towards Trump. The Colorado State Supreme Court banned him on the ballot under the absurd notion he tried to foment a rebellion. Okay, there was never an insurrection. It was a terrible, horrible riot. That's it. And it should never have taken place, but it wasn't a rebellion. And so they cry wolf all the time and lie and spread misinformation, the wonderful morally superior among us, who then are apoplectic and hysterical about any information that misinforms, which generally comes from their side of the political divide. And they tried to ban Trump on the ballot. And a unanimous Supreme Court decision overruled the Colorado State Supreme Court. Now, the rebuttal from Democrats will be, oh, well, there's 6 conservatives. Okay. But let's say the Colorado State Supreme Court might be mostly liberal. There was never there were never any Democrats saying, oh, well, that's a partisan decision by the Colorado State Supreme Court, or these federal judges blocking President Trump's immigration policies or issuing nationwide injunctions. The Democrats in media never say that those rulings are political in nature. They're left-leaning judges. They always say, oh, it's the rule of law. Whenever it suits them, it's the rule of law. But the United States Supreme Court decides what is and isn't constitutional. And they're routinely and constantly siding with President Trump. So he'll get the Voting Rights Act repealed, which will be devastating for Democrats because they gerrymander based on skin color. And so they won't be able to do that anymore. Or Republicans will be able to get 19 new seats. You'll hear exactly why in a second. But then the redistricting effort in Texas that was signed by the governor, that'll be constitutional. And then other states will be able to do exactly the same thing without federal judges getting in the way. Also, the notion that, President Trump almost won the Latino vote. It could be within 20 years that Republicans almost win the Black and African American vote. Why not? If Hispanic and Latino voters voted for Trump and Trump almost won the Latino vote after only getting, 26% in 2016, why not other demographic groups as well? So let's continue.
Potentially setting up a legal showdown.
The federal court has stopped this Texas redistricting map from going forward.
Yep.
Is this going to backfire?
Supreme Court of the United States will have a final word.
A 3-judge panel declaring a new map to add 5 GOP districts in Texas is racially gerrymandered, a claim that Texas is adamantly denying.
The state is fighting back, planning to file an appeal with the Supreme Court, and a ruling from the High Court could have national implications with redistricting fights underway in several states.
Molly Hemingway will join us on this in just moments.
But we begin with Brooke Taylor. She is live in Dallas. Brooke, to you.
Hi, Molly. Well, this decision was made by 3 federal judges, including Trump appointee Judge Jeffrey Brown, who voted in favor of blocking this GOP map, so going against the president here. In this 160-page filing, Judge Brown said, quote, politics played a role in drawing the 2025 map, but it was much more than just politics. Substantial evidence shows that Texas racially gerrymandered the 2025 map. Earlier this year, President Trump pushed Texas Republicans to redraw its congressional map in order to help the GOP keep their slim majority in the 2026 midterms. Now, on the left here, you have the map that was passed in 2021. So that's the old map. And on the right, this is the redistricting map that was passed earlier this year. It was aimed at flipping 5 Democratic House seats to Republican. Now, Democrats, you might remember, they fled Texas, staking out in blue cities for 2 weeks to try and block this vote. A lot weighs in the balance here with Republicans' majority in jeopardy for this coming midterm elections, Molly.
All right, Brooke Taylor, thank you. John?
All right, from one Molly to another, let's bring in Molly Hemingway, a Fox News contributor. We've just got an abundance of Mollys today. So Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas, is going to be taking this to the Supreme Court. But there's questions as to whether the Texas court ever had jurisdiction to hear this in the first place. There were a pair of cases back in the late 2010s. This one, it surrounded Rucho v. Common Cause. It was about gerrymandering in North Carolina. The Supreme Court majority, written by John Roberts, said, "We conclude that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts. Federal judges have no license to reallocate political power between the two major political parties. What the appellees in dissent seek is an unprecedented expansion of judicial power. We have never struck down a partisan gerrymander as unconstitutional, despite various requests over the past 45 years." I mean, if you listen to that, and then there was another case out of Maryland where the Supreme Court found that gerrymandering was non-justiciable, you wonder, where's this going to go?
So that's why these 2 members on this 3-member panel are trying to say that it's not partisan, that the Republicans in the Texas legislature were not doing this for partisan reasons. They're saying they did it for racial reasons, because then it would be able to be reviewed by their court. But it's kind of a difficult case to make. I mean, it's a long opinion, but it's going to be difficult to see how that goes when it gets to the Supreme Court level, in part because the facts of the case do seem to indicate President Trump asked the Texas legislature to give him 5 more seats for political gain. They said, "We'll do that for political gain." You have the testimony of the person who drew the district saying, "I did this to maximize Republican gains." And so then the court is saying, "No, actually, they did it for racial reasons." That's something that might be not seen as holding under scrutiny when it gets to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that dog may not hunt when it finally comes to the.
But every attempt of gerrymandering in Illinois or anywhere, California, by Democrats was always for political gain. That's why the gerrymandering exists. That's why they're so good at it. It's all for political gain.
The Supreme Court. Meantime, California Governor Gavin Newsom is positively crowing about this. He put out on X, "Donald Trump and Greg Abbott played with fire, got burned, and democracy won. This ruling is a win for Texas."
Of course, he spoke too soon, and Alito paused the lower court ruling, and the Supreme Court will almost certainly side with Governor Abbott. So yet again, the frontrunner for Democrats spoke too soon. J.D. Vance versus Newsom. J.D. Vance could win in a very similar landslide to what happened with Harris.
And for every American who fights for free and fair elections. It could be, though, if this does hold up in court, a brief victory for Gavin Newsom, because if it's not the right thing to do in Texas, how could it be the right thing to do in California?
Yeah, so it's different cases, but it's a similar situation in that the DOJ has said that California did use too much race in their redistricting in California. Now, again, we've got Supreme Court precedent saying you have to separate out race from politics. Those things tend to overlap quite a bit, though. People of certain racial groups tend to vote in groups, and so it can be difficult to do. But it does show, really, how much better Democrats have been at maximizing their congressional districts relative to Republicans.
To my super chat, thank you. Cricket Kiss, thank you so very much. Greatly appreciate it. To my super chat, thank you. Thank you so much.
You have states that have, 40, 45% Republicans with no representation in Congress. And the Republicans tend to, they're starting this game a little bit more, but they are well behind, decades behind where Democrats have been. And you can also see the tenacity with which people like Newsom are willing to push it even further.
So the president has been encouraging other states like Indiana to follow along the redistricting path. But one opponent of that is the California Republican Representative Kevin Kiley, who suggests that this idea of having a gerrymandering war really is a fool's errand. He said, quote, "This is why the only if Texas does it trigger was removed from Prop 50. California's gerrymander will stand even if the Texas map falls. If only someone had warned that a redistricting war was utterly foolish." So if Texas had not done this, California would.
It's not foolish if Republicans could get more seats. If Democrats could do that, they would do that already. They gerrymandered already to the point of absurdity. The only reason Prop 50 in California and Newsom passed that is because they had to do something to counter what Texas was doing. But the Republicans have not gerrymandered to the point Democrats have. They're at a disadvantage. Okay, also, Republicans do not have the entire media narrative propelling them and buoying them all the time. Democrats do. So, the defeatist mentality among a great many Republicans, not just, for the past 10, 20 years, 15 to 20 years, but this defeatist mentality that says, well, it's only going to end up in a lot of chaos. It's like, well, the Democrats, what they'll do is they'll find another dossier on whomever they don't like, left or right. The Steele dossier they'll eventually get indicted for, but they don't care. Congress, the Texas Congresswoman yesterday or the other day literally said that Lee Zeldin got a donation from a Jeffrey Epp. Well, then how many people were deceived by that statement? Okay, of course, we found out that it was she basically admitted to defamation. She admitted to defaming Lee Zeldin. It was a Jeffrey Epp who happened to be a neurosurgeon or a doctor, and he was on Hannity last night. We talked about that on the live stream when Marjorie Taylor Greene leaving. But it's like Democrats gerrymander to the point of absurdity. There are like thin blue lines of congressional districts amid sea of red Republican districts. So it's like, and then the mentality is, well, we can't do what they're doing, but they have more advantages. They have Jimmy Kimmel every single night. It's not freedom of speech. This is free campaign donations. These free publicity. Every single article is written, and talking about major newspapers also, not just like major newspapers in Arizona, throughout the country, California. It's always the Democratic Party's viewpoint. Journalists, by and large, are liberal. The media, by and large, has a liberal, left-leaning narrative. Universities, left-leaning narrative. So Republicans can now, with the Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act, and with the Supreme Court ruling upcoming, it already defended Abbott's redistricting, but can actually add more seats. What is wrong with that? My God, what is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. They're doing worse.
Wouldn't have done it. And if Texas falls and California stands, that could easily flip the balance of power in the House.
Again, if you look only at the last year, that's a very good argument. When you look at the last few decades of what has happened with redistricting, again, you have Democrat-controlled legislatures in Democrat-majority states that have really gone almost to the limits of what they can do. Republicans, again, just haven't done it anywhere near where they could, even in states that they control or have supermajorities in. So some people can argue that it was all done by this trigger, but other people could say, unless you have mutually assured destruction, it will just continue to be an unfair situation for Republican voters.
So quick prediction on what the Supreme Court will do.
They have been clear that there are multiple problems with how this case has gone with cases like this, including you're not supposed to nullify a map in the middle of an election, and Texas is right now having qualifying rounds for the next election. So it's there are multiple grounds on which they might not like this.
So Molly Hemingway of the Federalist is 100% right. Yet another Supreme Court victory. You have one just in a couple hours back with Alito blocking the federal court, but you have a huge victory on the horizon right here with Texas being able to, with the Supreme Court siding with Texas and ensuring no federal court gets in the way. And we're not even talking about the 19 more seats with the Voting Rights Act. So check this out.
Governor Greg Abbott says he's confident the U.S. Supreme Court will overturn this week's lower court ruling blocking the state from using its new congressional maps in next year's midterm elections. Eye on Politics reporter Jack Fink is in our newsroom with more on what the governor says about the issue and the nationwide implications. Jack, this has been a huge story this week.
Oh, yes. And Governor Abbott said the federal judge who wrote the ruling got it wrong. And he said he believes the nation's highest court will decide in Texas's favor. The state asked the judges in Texas to stay their ruling pending their appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but that request was denied today. Republicans hope to win 5 new congressional seats in Texas at the Democrats' expense, but 2 federal judges found, quote, substantial evidence that Texas racially gerrymandered the congressional maps. A third judge strongly dissented. Texas Republicans insisted they did not use race as a motivating factor when drawing the new congressional districts and that they only considered partisan gains. I asked Governor Abbott about this case during a political event in Frisco yesterday. How confident are you that the Supreme Court is going to rule in the state's favor? And what is your reaction to the fact that the majority opinion, the ruling, said that Texas used racially gerrymandered these maps?
There was zero evidence that any map drawing decision was made based upon race. The only people who were eligible to even be able to submit evidence on that were the members of the legislature whose intent was the only intent that mattered about what was contained in those maps. And to a person, everyone from the legislature who testified said race played no role whatsoever. It was all about politics.
So that's like what Molly Hemingway, the Federalist, stated. The judge who tried to block the Texas redistricting could not have done so if it was just about politics. They had every right to do whatever they want politically. They run the state legislature. It's a red state. Texas is a red state. It's not a blue state. It's a red state. Okay? Just like Florida now is a red state. But Texas was always red. But the point is, this was about politics. It wasn't about any racial issues, which is the only way that the judge could block the Texas redistricting effort. Now, if the same Supreme Court is about to overturn Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, they're almost certainly going to back Governor Abbott with the redistricting. Again, Democrats have done an infinitely better job of gerrymandering than Republicans. Okay? Most of the country, even like in California, in other states, you have all red and then the cities are blue. But most of every state, that's why you have President Trump winning over 2,000 counties, both elections. Most of every state is red. Let's continue.
Which is legal. Second, know this. The judge who wrote that opinion was just reversed last year by the Federal Court of Appeals in that judge's last decision about redistricting. He got that redistricting decision wrong. He got this one wrong also. I feel very confident the Supreme Court is going to take this case and once again overturn Judge Jeff Brown for a wrong ruling on redistricting.
We will go in depth on the redistricting showdown Sunday morning.
So this is exactly why Democrats in California as well have gone, they have tried everything possible to stop Texas. Check this out.
Have you here. Thank you so much. How would you take these Democrat districts out of your state?
So first of all, one reason why this even exists is because of the gross gerrymandering that's already been done by California, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, and so many Democrat states. What Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is threatening, and that is if Texas goes through with redistricting that eliminates 5 Democrat seats and aligns our congressional delegation with the values of the state of Texas, he says that he will work toward eliminating 5 Republican seats in California. And I'm saying that if he tries to do that, we have the capability, using the same strategy that they're using in California, to eliminate in Texas not just 5 seats of Democrats, but in fact 10 seats of Democrats. Yeah. And so here's what we know to oversimplify this. And that is, before Texas is working to redraw the congressional lines in the state of Texas, California, Illinois, and New York, they've gone to extremism with regard to drawing lines that eliminate Republicans from the congressional delegations in their states, and they have run out of bullets and will not be able to make any further changes in the future.
There are states that voted 45% for President Trump. Okay, there are 45% of a state. And there are numerous states like that. And Governor Abbott has talked about it. And it's like they have either 0 or 1 congressional seat, or maybe like 10 or 15% representation for Republicans in Congress. So just do the math. If 40% of a state votes for Trump, and it has a 0 representation for Republicans in Congress, what does that tell you about the Democrats and gerrymandering?
Right. But Texas and other Republican states will be able to make our states have larger Republican delegations in Congress.
Well, they wrote the book on gerrymandering, and to your point, they got no room left to go in the blue states, so it's not a winning proposition for them. But I want to get to this issue. You've issued warrants for Democrats who have fled the state. We've been following that.
Pony Soldier, thank you. Thank you so very much for the membership gift. Thank you.
What kind of punishment could they face back in Texas?
So several different punishments. One is the warrant is to arrest them if they set foot back into the state of Texas, and they will be taken to the Texas Capitol that will restore a quorum and allow us to conduct business. Second, there are several forms of punishment that will be meted out by the Texas House of Representatives that have been established there. Third, I filed a lawsuit in the Texas Supreme Court to have these officials who are Democrats in the Texas House, have them removed from office because they are failing to conduct business as required by the Texas Constitution. What the Texas Constitution requires is that they must be here and act on bills before them. They're failing to fulfill their constitutional duties. I am seeking to have them removed from office because of their dereliction of duty.
Well, the obvious next question is, well, how long do you think this fight will go on if they're going to just hang out in Illinois?
So we've been down this pathway before. Yeah. It happened 4 years ago, happened in 2003.
So Democrats in Texas fled Democrats to Illinois and other blue states. So they came back eventually. But he's talking about what the potential arrests of Democrats. I mean, look, they won in Virginia. Okay, great. They won in Virginia. President Trump, again, was 5 points away in New Jersey. Okay, and J.D. Vance has a lot of what President Trump has. Not everything, but he has that momentum. Okay, he doesn't have all of the momentum. He doesn't have all the momentum, but he's in some ways better at addressing the media. But he can do very well in 2028. If they get the House back in 26, so what? History shows that they will get the House back. But if it gets close, that just tells you how bad they are as a political party. And if Republicans get 19 seats from the Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act, and then they back Governor Abbott, you can have more Republican seats, which would make it a lot more difficult, which would allow Republicans to hold the House. Okay, but again, the House of Representatives doesn't control the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the CIA, all these agencies that were leveled against Trump that are now looking at criminal behavior from the people who leveled those agencies against Trump. But let's continue.
The fact of the matter is, they're going to run out of time. They're going to have to get back to the state of Texas. That's what always happens. But it really captures the moment. This is going to actually cause many of them to lose their jobs because running and hiding from a fight is un-Texan. And the fact that they turned tail and ran to Illinois, ran to California is embarrassing to them. It's a lack of character and it's a show of cowardice on their part by refusing to stay here and fight for what they believe and say their values are. And so I know that at one point in a time, when I call special session after special session after special session, they are eventually going to have to return and live up to their constitutional duty, and that is show up and cast votes based upon the bills before them.
Yeah, do your job. I'm going to change subject here, Governor. I want to say, mention that ICE is set to open the country's largest immigration detention facility at Fort Bliss. How does that benefit the facility? And as the Texas.
So this is why the Supreme Court will overturn Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. This is a very, very good breakdown.
Strategist May Mailman. May, it's great to see you here today. It looked like in oral arguments, the Supreme Court may be ready to put an end to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, meaning no longer can you use race to gerrymander these minority districts. You can't ensure, for example, a black district in Georgia.
Yeah, it's 2025, and it is time to stop drawing lines on the basis of race. We've had a black president. We've had a black and Asian vice president. As we see the race right now in Virginia, Republicans are going to vote for the black candidate, and Democrats are going to vote against. We are in 2025. It's time to move on. But unfortunately, you see justices like Ketanji Brown Jackson who do not agree that we should move to a race-free society, and instead want to portray race as disability. They want to see this as a disability, something that should be treated, something that should be focused on. And that takes us well before the Civil Rights Act. And so that type of thinking, race as a disability, is exactly the type of thinking that we're trying to get away from, but that you see Democrats or that you see Ketanji Brown Jackson trying to elevate more and more.
So again, President Trump, it took 10 years to almost win the Latino and Hispanic vote. In 2016, he was underwater. Like Clinton won the Latino vote by a good margin, by like 25 points, I believe. He only lost in 2024, Trump, the Latino and Hispanic vote by 4 or 5 points. Okay, who's to say 10 years from now, another Republican or Trump Republican, J.D. Vance, for re-election in 2032 could possibly come close to winning the black and African American vote. Who's to say that is impossible? Okay, people would say it would be impossible for Trump with his immigration policies and to win the Latino vote. He did. He almost did. I said almost did. In 10 years, it took 10 years for him to almost win the Hispanic and Latino vote. So 10 years from now, or 6 years from now, 8 years from now, in 2032, okay, 7 years from now, in 2032, let's say J.D. Vance runs for re-election, because there's nothing stopping J.D. Vance, okay? AOC, Newsom, they're not going to defeat J.D. Vance. Okay, I've called pretty much every election for the past 10 years. But anyway, who's to say that J.D. Vance couldn't win or almost get close to winning the black and African American vote? It's 2025. So anyway, let's continue.
Yeah, I think for anybody watching, they're probably sitting at home wondering, well, if you drew primarily and intentionally white districts, that would be not just racist, but it would be unconstitutional. And here we sit today, as you point out, in 2025, asking, why then can you do it in reverse? Why can you intentionally draw black or brown districts in America? The answer, by the way, the Supreme Court is debating is whether or not they are allowed to or compelled to by the Voting Rights Act. But as you point out, it's no longer 1965.
Yeah, in order to get these districts that have a black majority, states like Louisiana have to take pieces of New Orleans, pieces of Baton Rouge, snake around here, make a circle here, and it doesn't make any sense. If they were going to use neutral principles about keeping districts together, about incumbent protection, yes, sometimes about partisan advantage, but the things that people always use in redistricting, then it would look a lot different than this. And so what the Trump administration said is this is as if LSU had a policy where if a black student and a white student were totally equal, and the government is saying, but you have to pick the black student. That's what's going on here. It would never be allowed at LSU, but somehow it's being required under the Voting Rights Act.
In Congress, not allowed at LSU, but required for Congress in Washington, D.C. After the Civil War, the Civil Rights Act, Jim Crow, and another half a century, it might be time for America to actually consider not enshrining race-based policies.
So these Supreme Court victories are imminent.
All right. It's tough for Democrats. So they try to have it both ways on issues like redistricting, right? They like redistricting in states like California. They don't like redistricting when it happens in Texas, but they like it when it's happening in another blue state. And then when the issue goes all the way to the Supreme Court, different iteration of this, it's a disaster. And it's racist. The outcome, of course. The justice today heard oral arguments for Louisiana against Calais. It centers on a majority black district added in January 2024 to comply with Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act. The issue is whether the state relied too heavily on race when redrawing this district. But why should you care about a district in one state? You might not live there. You think, oh, this is an esoteric conversation. Ingram, why are we even doing it tonight? Because whatever the court decides, it could determine who controls the majority in the midterms. Politico calling it a nightmare scenario for.
And they will say that Republicans stole the 2026 midterms. They will use the word steal. They will probably use the phrase stop the, it's unbelievable steal. They will, when the sanctity of Biden's victory, oh my God, the sanctity. Oh, if you disagreed or said, nah, mashed potato brains, God bless him, couldn't have won. It's impossible. And there was something fishy with the mail-ins, and they cheat Bernie Sanders. They cheat their own candidates. So why wouldn't they do that against Trump also? They're cutthroat. I mean, talking about a vicious, vicious machine. And it's like they don't even have functioning primaries. Biden won his primary. Biden actually won his primary, and then he was kicked out. So that should tell you everything you need to know about Democrats. Modern day Democrats. Again, they're beautiful human beings. They're wonderful, awesome, amazing, beautiful, lovely human beings who are Democrats. Okay, I'm talking about the political party. I'm just referencing the political party, the modern day political party. Okay, but the sanctity of their victories, oh my God, it's gospel. It's more important than like the Bible and, the laws of physics and, historical record. But if they don't win, oh my God, Republicans stole it. Oh, it's, the Russians. Or it's, oh my God, gerrymandering. It's like, well, you did that's all you do is gerrymander. But anyway, let's continue.
Democrats if the Supreme Court guts Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, because it could lead to as many as 19 seats going to Republicans. Well, it's no surprise at all that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson went all in on using race.
My kind of paradigmatic example of this is something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system.
But if for the past 30 years you've had Democratic districts that have been impoverished and they've been under Democratic control for the past 30 or 40 years, let's say, when does the blame fall to the Democratic Party? Like when Biden said, "You ain't who you are" to Charlemagne the God if you don't vote for Biden. At what point are Democrats ever blamed for the poverty or the socioeconomic issues that exist within the districts that they demand political loyalty from?
Right? They're disabled.
So being black is the same as being disabled. And when Justice Sonia Sotomayor tried to argue in favor of these black congressional districts, well, you be the judge about whether it went over so well.
There's just no reason to assume that because there's a large Democratic population in Louisiana that doesn't have a district, that that's a racial reason rather than a partisan reason.
If you can't separate out the two, it's impossible.
But you can separate out the two. You can control for party, and you can.
Of course you can separate out the two. Trump almost won the Hispanic and Latino vote. You know, so...
require them to draw a map that meets the political objectives. And again, and the last thing that you said earlier, that means Section 2 has no effect. That's not true. The examples I gave you earlier about areas like Harlem and in Florida where you have of the same party and of the state that controls that party, differences in the races, that's where Section 2 does work.
You have proof of that here.
No, you don't. What you have here is that Republicans and Democrats are different. There's no...
You have some that even white Republicans or white Democrats won't vote for black candidates.
Wrong. The Democrats won't vote for people of color who are Republicans. Republicans have zero problem at all. They don't really care, especially if it's a candidate that has conservative values. It's Democrats that will not vote for a Republican who is a Republican who is a person of color.
Right, but if these were white Democrats, there's no reason to think they would have a second district. None. And so what is happening here is their argument is because these Democrats happen to be black, they get a second district. If they were all white, we all agree they wouldn't get a second district. That is literally the definition of race subordinating traditional principles.
I'm not sure Justice Sotomayor even read the briefs in this case. I mean, did you read any of the briefs, any of it whatsoever? Luckily, my old boss, Justice Clarence Thomas, was there to get some actual answers, starting with the case that led to this entire thing.
What role did Robinson play in the development of SB 8?
Justice Thomas, Robinson is the only reason SB 8 exists. We fought tooth and nail in the Robinson litigation itself in telling the courts that we did not think the Constitution permitted us to draw a second majority black district. As you know, under protest, we drew SB 8 because the threat was that the federal courts were going to do it if we didn't. And that's, I mean, I think that's the best way to conceive of why SB 8 exists. We would never pass SB 8 in the first instance without Robinson, Justice Thomas.
What were the findings in Robinson?
The finding by the Middle District in Robinson was that the plaintiffs in this case were likely to show a violation of Section 2. That was the bottom line, and when our legislature saw that, we understood the marching order, and that's why you see SB 8 as it exists today.
Here to react, Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt. I mean, did you get continuing legal education credit for watching that, maybe. Eric? I'm not sure I was following that, but we'll see. What Justice Thomas was getting at, though, is that this district would not exist at all without the 2022 court case forcing it to happen.
Right. They had a 5-1 map. The court then made them kind of go back and do a 4-2 map. And this case is a very important case because I think it'll come down 5-4, 6-3 just based on the alignment. But basically, you can't use race as a reason to have a congressional district. I mean, this sort of gets back to this very important idea in this country, just like you're not guaranteed the result of somebody who is of your race or of your religion. You vote in this representative republic for people. And I think the court is either going to strike down the Voting Rights Act or maybe a middle ground would be something.
No, the middle ground. You know what the middle ground always ends up doing? Creating more confusion and more litigation.
Well, right. But I think Roberts is that swing vote. But he's already said in a previous case, in the Harvard case, we need to stop divvying up this country by race. So I'm pretty confident that that the Voting Rights Act will probably be thrown out here.
So, but this has been used since I was a law clerk. It has been used as a cudgel, a political cudgel And yet lots of like Republicans or conservatives, they knew that this had to go, but a lot of them were afraid to kind of say it, right? Because they were, oh, if you say this, you're a racist. And no, it's a constitutional question.
Right. You shouldn't discriminate on the basis of race. And if you want to get rid of discrimination based on race, you should stop discriminating based on race. And I think that's what this case is going to come down to. But the Democrats know the reason why they're kicking and screaming here is they know it means potentially 19 seats are drawn like this. Not to mention the 5 seats that were based on a fake algorithm during COVID to give them additional seats. So
Look at that district. Look at that district.
Right.
Look at that screen right now. That is like an amoeba mixed with a bad virus, mixed with a...
So the same thing's in Illinois also. Look at, this is the definition of gerrymandering. This is the definition of gerrymandering right here. So Louisiana is red. It's a red state. And so you have these blue line, like a line across the state where Democrats said, oh, this has to be a Democratic area. But why would you assume that because a demographic voted Democrat 20 years ago or 10 years ago that they would have to vote Democrat in 2025 or 26?
Rorschach test. I don't know what that is.
So I think a lot of these kind of institutional ways that the Democrats protected these majorities, using race as that cudgel, are probably going to go away. And we're going to have districts that, again, are compliant with the constitutional principle that you shouldn't discriminate based on race.
Well, this idea that just merit is what matters. And you want everyone to have equal opportunity. You want government or public schools to actually teach all kids and be competitive with other schools. And that's why school choice is good. So give kids a chance to learn. That's what brings people up from poverty or unfortunate circumstances, regardless of your race. But the Democrats fight those things that actually work. That's what's crazy.
They do, and you could hear by Justice Jackson's completely bought into this critical race theory tenet, which is that only a black Democrat can represent black Americans.
That a white Democrat won't vote for a black candidate.
Right.
I mean, when I heard that, I was like, what?
Yeah, it again
didn't Obama get elected twice? Like, what did I miss?
Right. It's this race essentialism that's incredibly divisive in this country.
So the Supreme Court yet again backed President Trump, Greg Abbott. That'll happen also. You have virtually all of media, as always, going after Trump and Republicans. So when people say, well, Democrats are going to take back the House, because of media, not because they stand for anything, not because they have any answers. They lost miserably in 24, and they won in Virginia, but Virginia has a very strong Democratic Party. So that's not a barometer of nationwide success. Virginia went to Trump. So try to explain that. If not for, I mean, you could say, well, the economy, but the economy is going to get a lot better. Real wages are up. During Trump's first term, real wages were down most of Biden's tenure. We can go on for anyway. Hit subscribe to this channel. Be here tonight around 9.